Once she signs, the house is free. She's practically not there anymore, Andrew. Mentally, emotionally, she's basically already gone. I heard my son's voice through the heavy oak door of the lawyer's office before I even stepped into the room. It was a cold, clinical sound, the kind of tone you'd use to discuss a piece of machinery that had finally stopped working. I stood there in the hallway, my hand frozen on the brass knob, feeling the rough wool of my coat against my wrists. For a split second, I actually looked behind me, wondering if there was a ghost following me, because surely he couldn't be talking about the woman who had just driven herself 20 minutes across town in a rainstorm. But then I heard the lawyer's chair creak, and my son's voice dropped an octave, dripping with a rehearsed, oily sympathy. It's for her own good, really. We can remodel the upstairs, sell it while the market is peaking, and get her into a facility where she'll have supervision. She won't even know the difference. I felt a chill move up my spine that had nothing to do with the damp weather outside. It was the sound of a shovel hitting dirt. My own flesh and blood was bearing me while I was still standing in my sensible shoes, breathing the same air he was. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. I just stood there, still as an old coat on a hook, listening to the man whose fevered forehead I'd pressed my palm against 1,000 times talk about me like I was a burden he was eager to liquidate. Andrew didn't see me. He didn't see the way my knuckles went white as I gripped my purse. He only saw a profitable sale and a managed ending for a mother who had become an inconvenience. Legally, Andrew, what exactly do you think I've lost? I asked. I stepped into the room then, my voice quiet but sharp enough to slice right through his comfortable lies. Andrew's head snapped toward me and the blood drained from his face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. He went that sickly shade of gray people get when they're caught in a truth they never intended for the light of day. His mouth opened, but no words came out, just a dry, panicked little gasp. I walked straight to the table, each step feeling heavier than the last, and I looked him right in those eyes I'd given him. I'd been a nurse for 40 years. I'd seen death, I'd seen birth, and I'd seen everything in between. But nothing had prepared me for the sight of my son looking at me and seeing only a signature on a deed. I didn't cry. I didn't break. Not yet. But in that silence, I made a promise to myself. Andrew wanted to talk about who was gone. Well, tomorrow I'd be calling a different lawyer. Some changes needed to be made to the family tree, quietly, permanently. You know that feeling, don't you, darling? That moment when you realize the person you've spent your whole life protecting is the one you now need protection from. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and it stays in the back of your throat no matter how much tea you drink. I sat there at that mahogany table looking at the two men, and I realized that my son had forgotten one very important thing. I was the one who taught him how to walk. I certainly knew how to walk away from a bad deal. Andrew finally managed to find his voice, though it sounded thin and reedy. Mom, you weren't supposed to be here for another 15 minutes. He tried to offer a smile, but it was just a nervous twitch of the lips. I grew up in a generation that believed if you weren't 10 minutes early, you were late, Andrew, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. I didn't wait for the lawyer to invite me. I didn't look for permission. And it seems I arrived just in time to hear my obituary. Tell me, Andrew, what color are the walls in the facility you've picked out for me? I hope they aren't that drab beige you've always liked. The lawyer, a young man who looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk, cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, I think there's been a misunderstanding of the scope of our conversation. There is no misunderstanding, I told him, turning my gaze away from my son. My son believes my mind has become a dusty attic where things go to be forgotten. He believes I am a technicality standing between him and a paycheck. But let me be very clear. I am the owner of that house. I sewed the quilts on the beds. I planted the peonies that bloom every June, and I am the one who pays the property taxes every year with the pension I earned by holding the hands of people much stronger than you. Andrew sighed then, that sharp, impatient sound he'd been making since he was a teenager. Mom, you're twisting things. You're being emotional. I'm under pressure. The market is insane, and that house is, it's a lot of work. You don't even use the upstairs anymore. I don't use the upstairs because my knees don't care for the climb. Andrew, not because my brain has stopped functioning, I replied. I felt a strange cold peace settling over me. It was the same clarity I used to feel during a double shift at the hospital when a patient's heart would start to flutter. You don't panic. You just do what needs to be done. Have you ever loved someone so completely that you couldn't see they'd stop loving you back? I think I had been guilty of that for years. I'd excused Andrew's coldness as busyness. I'd excused his lack of visits as career pressure. I'd even sent him money when he said his investments were tied up, never once asking why a successful man needed his mother's savings. I had been a co-conspirator in my own disappearance, smoothing over the cracks in our relationship until I was the only thing holding it together. I stood up slowly. My joints ached, but my spine was a rod of iron. I think this meeting is over, I said. Mom, wait, Andrew said, reaching for my arm. I pulled back as if his touch were a hot stove. Don't, I said. You go home to your wife and your pressure, Andrew. I'm going to take a walk. And don't bother calling the house tonight. I've already heard everything you have to say. I walked out of that office and into the hallway. My legs were trembling, a fine rhythmic shaking that made the floor feel like it was made of water. But I didn't stop. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the building and stepped onto the sidewalk. The rain had turned to a fine mist, the kind that clings to your eyelashes and makes the world look blurry. I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I didn't have anyone to check in with. I didn't have anyone to worry about. I was just Maggie Hale, a woman who was supposedly gone, but who had never felt more present in her own skin. The walk home was only 3 blocks, but it felt like miles. I passed the bakery where I used to buy Andrew ginger snaps when he was a boy. I passed the park where George and I used to sit on the bench and talk about who we'd be when we were old. George has been gone for 10 years now. I whispered his name into the mist. He's trying to sell the house, George. He's trying to sell our life. I could almost hear George's voice in the wind, that low, steady rumble of his. Stand up straight, Maggie. Don't let him walk through you. When I reached my porch, the wooden step groaned under my weight. It was a familiar sound, a welcoming sound. I unlocked the door and stepped into the entryway, and the smell of lavender and old books wrapped around me like a shawl. This house wasn't just wood and brick. It was a vessel. It held the echoes of 30 years of laughter, the stains of spilled grape juice on the carpet, the height marks penciled into the pantry door. How do you put a price on the place where you learned how to be a family? I sat down in George's old armchair in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there and listened to the house. The refrigerator hummed, the radiator clanked, the clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds. I realized then that Andrew didn't hate me. That would have been easier to handle. No, he just found me unnecessary. He'd looked at the life I'd built and decided it had reached its expiration date. But anger at 74 isn't like anger at 20. It isn't a fire that burns out fast. It's more like a slow-moving glacier. It's heavy, it's cold, and it changes the landscape as it moves. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I saw a missed call from Andrew, then another. I deleted them without listening. Then I dialed a number I hadn't called in a very long time. Sophia? I said when my granddaughter answered. Grandma, is everything okay? You sound different. Everything is changing, sweetheart, I told her. I need you to come over tomorrow. I need someone I can trust to help me look through some papers. And Sophia, don't tell your father. There was a long pause on the other end. Sophia has always been the one who sees too much. She has George's eyes, the kind that look right past the surface of things. I'll be there at 8, Grandma. I'm bringing the good tea. I hung up and felt a tiny spark of a win. Sophia was 23 now, a paralegal with a sharp mind and a heart that hadn't been hardened by corporate pressure yet. She was the only one in that branch of the family who still looked at me like a person, instead of a liability. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the folders in my desk. Andrew thought I was easy to manage because I'd always been kind. He'd mistaken my grace for a lack of a backbone. He'd forgotten that before I was his mother, I was a woman who navigated the chaos of a trauma ward every night for 4 decades. I knew how to triage a situation, and right now, my relationship with my son was in critical condition, and the only way to save myself was to cut the ties. Have you ever looked at your own reflection and realized you've been shrinking yourself to make room for everyone else's ego? I looked in the mirror the next morning and I saw a woman I finally recognized. I wasn't basically gone, I was just getting started. Sophia arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, her backpack heavy with her laptop and a tin of Earl Grey. She didn't ask questions at first. She just walked into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and started toast. That's the thing about grandbabies. They know when you need a meal more than a lecture. All right, Grandma, she said, sitting down across from me with 2 steaming mugs. Tell me what Dad did. I saw him at dinner last night, and he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He kept snapping at Mom and checking his phone. I told her everything. I told her about the hallway, the gone comment, the facility, the management of my life. I saw her jaw tighten as I spoke. I saw her hands curl into fists. She didn't interrupt until I was finished. He wants the house for the equity, Grandma, she said, her voice trembling with a quiet fury. He's been over-leveraged for 2 years. I heard him talking to a broker on his birthday. He needs the money to cover a bad development deal in the city. I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my chest. So it wasn't just that he thought I was old. He was using my home as a safety net for his own greed. He didn't ask me for help, I whispered. He tried to steal it while I was still in the room. Because he knew you'd say no to that kind of risk, Sophia said. He knows how you feel about this house. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was so warm, so full of life. What do you want to do? Because if he has power of attorney, we have to move fast to revoke it. I signed it 10 years ago, I said, a wave of dread washing over me. Right after your grandfather died. I was so lost, Sophia. I thought I could trust him to look out for me. We're going to fix it, she promised. I've already looked up the statutes. If we can prove you're of sound mind, which is the easiest thing in the world, we can revoke his authority and set up a trust. We can make it so he can't even touch a door hinge without your permission. We spent the next 4 hours at that kitchen table. It was a battlefield of paper. We went through my bank statements, my insurance policies, and the deed to the house. I saw things I hadn't noticed before, small withdrawals, administrative fees that had been siphoned off for months. Not enough to notice at a glance, but enough to hurt. He's been bleeding you dry, Grandma, Sophia whispered, her eyes wet with tears. How could he? Because people forget that love is a verb, sweetheart, I said. They start thinking it's a debt that's already been paid. I felt a micro-victory every time we found another way to block him. We drafted the letters, we scheduled the appointments. By noon, I had a plan that would turn Andrew's world upside down, but I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it for the girl I used to be, the one who worked 3 jobs to put George through school, the one who never took a day off so her kids could have the best of everything. I was finally standing up for her. The doorbell rang at 1 o'clock. We both jumped. I looked through the lace curtain and saw Andrew's car in the driveway. He wasn't alone. He had a man in a suit with him, a contractor likely. He was already measuring my yard with his eyes. Don't let them in, Sophia whispered. No, I said, smoothing my apron. Let them in. I want them to see exactly who's still here. I opened the door before Andrew could even reach for his key. He looked startled to see me standing there, and even more startled to see Sophia behind me. Mom, Sophia? What are you doing here? He asked, trying to sound jovial. This is Mr. Vance. He's just taking some measurements for the insurance update we talked about. We never talked about an insurance update, Andrew, I said. I didn't step back to let them in. I stood in the threshold like a guardian, and Mr. Vance can take his tape measure elsewhere. There will be no renovations on this property. Andrew's face went that familiar ugly shade of red. Mom, don't be difficult in front of guests. We're trying to help you. The porch is sagging and the roof is fine and the porch has character, I interrupted. Mr. Vance, I'm sure you're a busy man. My son has made a mistake. This house is not for sale and it is not being remodeled. Good day. The contractor looked between us, muttered an apology, and practically ran back to his truck. Andrew was shaking now. You! You have no right to embarrass me like that. I'm the one handling your affairs. I'm the one making sure you don't end up in a gutter. You're the one who forgot I'm still alive, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter Sophia and I had just finished. Here is a copy of the revocation of power of attorney, Andrew. It was sent to your lawyer's office by courier 20 minutes ago. As of this moment, you have no legal authority over my life, my money, or my home. He grabbed the paper, his eyes darting across the lines. You can't do this. I'll contest it. I'll tell them you're senile. I'll tell them you've been manipulated by Sophia. Try it, Sophia said, stepping forward. I've recorded every word of your management plans, Dad, and I've got the bank statements showing where Grandma's money has really been going. Do you really want to explain those administrative fees to a judge? Andrew looked at his daughter as if he were seeing a stranger. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing his mother, but the fear of losing his meal ticket. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, his fancy suit looking a little too big for him. The house was silent after his car roared out of the driveway. I sat down on the porch steps, the cold air biting at my cheeks. I felt exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind you feel after you've finally cleaned out a closet that's been cluttered for years. Are you okay, Grandma? Sophia asked, sitting down beside me. I'm more than okay, honey, I said. I'm present, I'm rooted, and I'm not going anywhere. Do you ever feel like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop even when you've already won? That was me for the next few days. I'd jump every time the phone rang, and I'd peek through the blinds every time a car slowed down near my driveway. It's hard to unlearn 30 years of being the accommodating one, but then I'd look at that folder on my desk, the one that legally declared me the master of my own fate, and I'd feel that iron return to my spine. Andrew didn't call. He didn't come by. I heard from a cousin that he was furious and telling everyone I'd had a breakdown. It hurt, hearing my own son use my age as a weapon against my reputation. But then I thought about all those nights in the hospital, how I'd seen people fight for one more day of dignity. If they could do it in a hospital gown, I could certainly do it in my own living room. I started doing things I hadn't done in a decade. I went to the library and checked out a stack of books on art history. I joined a gardening club where the average age was 80, and let me tell you, those ladies have more fire in them than a room full of CEOs. I realized that the world doesn't stop wanting you just because you have a few wrinkles. It's just that some people are too blind to see the value in a vintage soul. One afternoon, I was out in the yard pruning the roses. The sun was warm on my back, and the smell of damp earth was better than any expensive perfume. I saw a car pull up. It wasn't Andrew's SUV, it was a beat-up old sedan. A woman got out, Andrew's wife, Brenda. Now, Brenda and I have always had what you might call a polite distance. She's the kind of woman who thinks a house isn't finished unless it looks like a hotel room. She walked up to the fence, her designer handbag clutched tight to her side. Maggie, she said, her voice strained, we need to talk. He's in a bad way. The bank is calling in the loans on the development, and he was counting on the equity from this place to bridge the gap. He's losing sleep. He's losing his hair. I didn't stop clipping the roses. He should have thought about his sleep before he started planning my funeral while I was still in the room, Brenda. He was just being practical, she cried. He's your son. How can you be so cold? Do you want to see him ruined? I set the shears down and looked at her. I didn't see an enemy. I just saw a woman who had hitched her wagon to a man who didn't know how to drive. I don't want to see him ruined, Brenda, but I won't be the fuel for his fire anymore. I spent 40 years giving him everything. I gave him a college education, a down payment on his first home, and a mother who never said no. And you know what that got me? It got me a seat in a facility while he sold my memories. He'll pay you back, she promised, though we both knew it was a lie. He can pay me back by becoming a man who respects his elders, I said. Until then, my door's closed to him. And to you, I have some gardening to finish. Brenda stood there for a moment, her mouth hanging open before she turned and stomped back to her car. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't joy exactly. It was more like relief. Have you ever finally said the thing you've been swallowing for 20 years? It's better than any tonic. I went back to my roses. I realized then that my house wasn't just a building, it was a sanctuary, and I was the only priestess allowed inside. I thought about Sophia. I thought about the trust I was building for her. I wanted her to see that a woman's worth isn't tied to her usefulness to men. I wanted her to know that even at 74, you can reclaim your name. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, Andrew as a little boy sitting on George's lap, both of them grinning. No note, no apology, just the photo. It made my heart ache, remembering that sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions. I sat on the porch and cried then, not because I regretted my choice, but because I mourned the man he should have been. It's a strange thing being a mother. You give pieces of yourself away, day by day, year by year, until sometimes you look in the mirror and wonder if there's anything left for yourself. I realized that by saying no to Andrew, I was finally saying yes to Maggie, and that was the most maternal thing I could do, teaching my son that his mother was a human being with a soul, not just a resource to be tapped. I'm 74 years old. I have silver hair, a bad left knee, and a house that needs a little paint on the shutters. But I also have my dignity. I have my granddaughter's respect. And I have a future that I'm writing myself, one June peony at a time. I learned that day what every mother eventually learns. Love isn't always enough to change someone. You can pour your life into a child, but you can't give them a conscience. That's something they have to find on their own. And until Andrew finds his, I'll be right here, sitting in my chair, reading my books, and watching the sunset over the porch George and I built. I've learned that choosing peace isn't giving up, it's finally choosing yourself. It's realizing that your life is a gift you were meant to open, not a sacrifice you were meant to offer. Every mother gives pieces of herself away. The question is, do we leave anything for ourselves? I'm keeping the best parts for me now. And you know what? They've never tasted sweeter. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt like you were disappearing into the background of your own life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever had to make the hard choice between family obligation and your own peace? Have you ever had to find your voice when everyone else was trying to keep you quiet? Let's talk, darling, because we're not gone. We're right here and we have so much left to say. I'm going to go make another cup of tea now. The house is quiet, but it's a good kind of quiet. It's the sound of a woman who has finally come home to herself. Remember, darling, it's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to stand up straight and tell the world that you're still here. You are the author of your own ending, and you don't have to let anyone else hold the pen. I'll be here, waiting for your stories. Until next time, take care of your heart. It's the only one you've got. The moon is rising now, a thin silver sliver over the sycamores. I think I'll stay out here a little longer and just breathe. No plans, no facilities, just me and the night air. It's a good life, Maggie, I tell myself. A very good life. I can hear the kettle whistling in the kitchen. It's a friendly sound, a sound of life, a sound that says someone is home, and that someone is me. Good night, dear friends, and thank you for listening to An Old Woman's Heart. It means more than you know. I think tomorrow I'll finally paint those shutters a bright, defiant blue, just like my favorite sweater. Blessings to you all. See you in the next story. With all my love and respect, Maggie.